Good morning and welcome to the Thursday morning teaching. Venerable Kadro just left on Tuesday for a short teaching tour in Singapore. She'll be back, I think, the first or second week in April. And so for the next 5 Thursday mornings, some of the seniors will be reviewing what she's been covering since December, the 2 types of developing bodhicitta. Have you been enjoying her presentations? Yeah, very rich. And especially during retreat where we have time to meditate on it. So we're very fortunate. So this morning we'll begin looking at the Sevenfold cause and effect instruction for developing bodhicitta, especially the preliminary or the prelude, equanimity, and then the first of the 7, recollecting that all beings have been our mothers. So that's what we're planning to do today. So we'll begin with some prayers. And then a little bit of silence, and then I'll set a motivation.
I take refuge until I have awakened in the Buddhist, the Dharma, and the Sangha. By the merit I create, by engaging to the Dharma, I will attain Buddhahood in order to benefit all sentient beings. I take refuge until I have awakened in the Buddhist, the Dharma, and the Sangha. By the merit I create, by listening to the Dharma, I will attain Buddhahood in order to benefit all sentient beings. I take refuge until I have awakened in the Buddhist, the Dharma, and the Sangha. By the merit I create, by listening to the Dharma, I will attain Buddhahood in order to benefit all sentient beings. May all sentient beings have happiness and its causes. May all sentient beings be free of suffering and its causes. May all sentient beings not be separated from sorrowless bliss. May all sentient beings abide in equanimity, free of bias, attachment, and anger.
So let's cultivate our motivation for the review this morning. Currently, humanity seems to be facing a very complex list of challenges. The climate crisis, political instability, the rise of authoritarianism. It just goes on and on. Nuclear proliferation, bioengineering, the risks of AI gone amok. There's a long list. And if we're not mindful, if we're not careful, thinking about these things can easily overwhelm our mind. But luckily, as Buddhists, we are knowledgeable about karma, the law of cause and effect. And we have some understanding that karma is definite, meaning that all happiness comes from previously accumulated virtuous karma, and all suffering arises from previously accumulated non-virtuous karma. And so, with conviction in the law of cause and effect, we understand that Russia and China are not our enemies, as it's been said recently, and certain egregious political figures are not our enemies. Our real enemies are attachment, anger, ignorance, self-centeredness. These are the real enemies that we need to fight against. And so when anger arises in our mind, we need to recognize it. Instead of welcoming it as a friend that's going to protect us, we need to see it as the thief that it really is, that it's stealing our peace and our happiness, and apply an antidote. So often we just let anger run in the background. And the same thing with attachment. Instead of inviting it in thinking it's going to make us happy, we can see it as a setup for suffering. It's not going to pan out well, we know this. And apply an antidote. So this morning, let's fully entrust ourselves to the three jewels who have taught us about karma, the Four Noble Truths, developing bodhicitta, the six perfections. They've given us the entire path that we need to come out of suffering. And recognizing the immense confusion in the minds of most sentient beings, then by working to free ourselves of karma and afflictions, we'll have more clarity and stability of mind to help others in really meaningful ways, in productive ways. So let's engage this morning in this review of how to develop the most precious mind, the mind of bodhicitta, as a cause to fulfill our heartfelt aspiration to attain full awakening so that we can be of greatest benefit to all beings. So, usually we describe bodhicitta as the wish to achieve full awakening for the benefit of all sentient beings. And just as a reminder, bodhicitta has it's described as a main mind with two aspirations. And we'll see that in the outline that Lama Tsongkhapa gives us. There's a causal aspiration, wishing to accomplish the welfare of all beings. That means for all beings to come out of misery, out of suffering, and to attain full awakening. And then also there's this accompanying aspiration, wishing to achieve enlightenment ourselves so that we can accomplish that causal aspiration. And by attaining complete awakening, then we will be, as we've seen in our studies, especially of refuge, that will be the greatest platform, the greatest situation to be able to benefit all beings, because we'll have so many good qualities and so many abilities at our fingertips. And Buddhahood is not possible without bodhicitta. It's I remember Venerable Rabina describing it as the rocket fuel. It's the rocket fuel that wisdom realizing emptiness needs to overcome even the most subtle cognitive obscurations. So renunciation will get us part of the way, but actually we need the power and the breadth and the depth of bodhicitta to take us over the line to actually abandon all the subtle cognitive obscurations. So first we learn about what is bodhicitta, how to describe it, and then talking about the different causes required to develop it and the importance of those causes, and also how those causal relationships work. And then once we understand that, now we're ready to begin developing bodhicitta step by step. And bodhicitta is different from other Lamrim topics where we can just engage immediately. There's a very clear way to engage with the preciousness of our human life or karma or things like that. But with bodhicitta, we have to go step by step, and it's actually quite a prolonged process. So it's going to take more effort on our part, but it's certainly, as you know, and as we'll see, it's very worth it. Geshe Sopa in his commentary says, even if it takes our whole life to master just the first step, we will have begun an essential practice. So bodhicitta is not easy. It takes effort, it takes time, but that's what we're here to do. We're on chapter 15 in the Middle-Length Treatise on the stages of the path to enlightenment by Lama Tsongkhapa. And he starts that chapter by saying the sevenfold cause and effect instruction is this: a complete Buddha is born from bodhicitta, this mind from the extraordinary attitude, or the wholehearted resolve. There are many ways to translate that. This attitude comes from compassion, great compassion, and compassion from love, love from the wish to repay the kindness wish to repay kindness from remembering the kindness, and remembering the kindness from seeing beings as one's mother. So that's the reverse order. So it's good if we're very familiar with these 7 points that we can go in the forward order. We can also call it to mind and think about how necessary the previous step is for each of the steps we're cultivating. So if you put up the slides. Just quickly to review the outline that we've been looking at. It's very kind of Venerable Khandro to put these outlines together so that we can see. One of the challenges of this text is that all the outlines are flush with the left side of the book, and so it's hard to really see it and use it as a visual cue about how these things are laid out. So we begin with looking at this section in 3 points. The stages for training in bodhicitta, and that's where we find the sevenfold cause and effect instruction that was transmitted by Atisha. And also it's said that that's traced back to Maitreya. And then the training based on texts by the Bodhisattva Shantideva, that also is traced back through Manjushri. The Buddha gave these teachings to Manjushri, and they've been carried. And then they were brought together by Lama Atisha, and have been passed on to us. So I would just like to offer some experience, what I've seen in studying the Lamrim over the years, and that is if we take one Lamrim text and really make that our basis, really understand that text well, then when we hear different English translations or when we hear slightly different presentations, we have some basis to come back to, and to compare to. But if we just keep hearing lots of different teachings, it might be confusing for us because I thought I heard it that way, but now it's being presented this way. So given that the Middle-Length Lamrim is a shorter Lamrim text, it's certainly shorter than the Lamrim Chenmo, it's a really good text to become extremely familiar with. And because we're going through it slowly, week by week, then we have the chance to really take a time to look at the outline. The outline is there to help us. And then to think about, well, what's the main point underneath this heading of the outline? That way we carry the whole text with us. And it's right there for us when we need it to apply it in our own lives and also then to share it with others. Okay, so let's look at the second slide. We're going to be looking at point A then. The sevenfold instruction for developing bodhicitta, and there are these 2 main points. The way great compassion, or the extraordinary attitude, really, I think is what it's talking about. The way great compassion is the root of the Mahayana, and then the way the other causes and effects, generating certainty concerning the stages and the actual gradual training. And then within that, so I won't go into, we don't have time to go into much detail here, but it is, I think, worth noting, the way great compassion is the root of the Mahayana, to really take that on board. This is our practice as Mahayanas. And so why is it important at the beginning? We talk about great compassion, but like I said, I think it's really pointing to the extraordinary attitude, which is great compassion, because that's what really propels a person to develop bodhicitta. So at the beginning, it's important because uncontrived bodhicitta is the entrance of the Mahayana path of accumulation. That's how we start on the path and then get involved with creating a lot of merit through the 6 perfections. It's important in the middle because when we're practicing those 6 perfections, we're going to come up against all sorts of difficult situations, all sorts of difficult sentient beings, and a lot of hardships actually in completing the path. Really exchanging our happiness for the suffering of others. That's not easy. So we need great compassion in the middle as well. And then the importance of compassion at the end. Buddhas have that great compassion, that bodhicitta, and that's what is fueling them to be benefiting sentient beings 24/7, all day long, whether we believe in them or not. I mean, we do have to create some causes from our side, but Buddhas are impartially helping all sentient beings. So, great compassion is the root of the Mahayana, and so important along all the stages of the path. So this is why we're encouraged to really make effort in beginning to cultivate this in our own practice. So I'll leave the other section in that, underneath that point, the way other causes and effects become causes and effects of that great compassion. That requires some thought, so I'll leave that to you to take a look at that. So the next slide is looking at the actual gradual training. And I think this section of the outline is probably the most important for understanding the sevenfold instruction. Because look here, we've got the training in the mind that strives for the welfare of others. So that's the first aspiration, isn't it? Training in the mind that strives for the welfare of others. And that's going to include equanimity, as well as the first 6 steps of the sevenfold instruction. And we can even look at that in terms of these 2 sections that we'll begin looking at today, laying the foundation for that mind. So that's equanimity through recognizing all beings having been our mother, reflecting on their kindness, and wishing to repay their kindness. So as Venerable Kadro explained very clearly, that's what helps to cultivate this affectionate love, this ability to see all beings as appealing, as likable, the way it's been translated here. But usually it's described as, we need to see all beings as appealing, otherwise we won't really want to work for their sake. We won't really want to make the effort to cultivate love, compassion, and the extraordinary attitude. So laying the foundation, and then the actual generation of that mind is the next 3 steps. So love, great compassion, and the extraordinary attitude, which Venerable described also as great compassion. All right, and then that leads to that second step, part B, training in the mind that strives for enlightenment. That's our second aspiration. And that's the result of the first six steps with equanimity. Does that make sense? So putting this together in our mind really gives us a lot of information about what we're doing with each of those steps and why each step is important. So I encourage you to really take that to heart. And then the third step there under the actual gradual training is identifying the bodhicitta that is the result of that training. Really identifying when it is we have accomplished uncontrived bodhicitta. So in this method, it's generally understood that of the 7, there are 6 causes for developing bodhicitta, and then the result is bodhicitta itself. Okay, so let's look at the next slide. This is just another way of understanding that, the sevenfold cause and effect instructions. So the prelude, or the prerequisite, equanimity, that we'll look at today. Then laying the foundation for that mind to arise, seeing all beings as having been our mother, remembering the kindness, wishing to repay that kindness. And there's where we've accomplished, hopefully we've accomplished affectionate love for all beings. And then the actual generation of that mind through the next 3 steps, and then the result, bodhicitta. So we begin by cultivating equanimity to eliminate attachment towards people we easily like and aversion towards people that we dislike. And this makes our minds serviceable for developing virtuous states, good qualities. Otherwise, as we've heard, our love and compassion will be biased, it will be partial, and it won't be able to fulfill, it won't be able to act as a cause for developing bodhicitta. It will thwart our aspiration to develop bodhicitta. So one analogy is it's like preparing a smooth canvas before beginning a painting. And we have some videos of Tenzin Nudrup, who's been, and he shows how he prepares the canvas for creating a thangka. And he stretches it, first he stretches it out to make it smooth, and then there's a kind of washing, it looks like, and probably other steps that we don't see. There's probably something in the water that he's washing it with. And then painting it, it looks like it has a yellow background. So there's lots of preparation that goes into actually preparing a canvas, not just going to some store and buying it already stretched. Tsongkhapa describes it like clearing away stones when preparing a field for planting. So again, we have our own experience of that, thinking about all the preparations that were put into place before building the Buddha Hall. There was a lot of preparation of the site to be a firm and stable foundation to build the building. Geshe Sopa points out that we naturally have a tendency to discriminate among sentient beings. It's so easy to put people in categories, friend, enemy, stranger. It happens automatically. It's not like a conscious thought even, it's just there, isn't it? We care for some, we don't like others, because why? Because we're so concerned about ourselves. It comes from self-cherishing. So this is another point to really highlight in this section, is that bodhicitta is what helps us overcome self-centeredness, which prevents our ability of attaining full awakening. So even though that process is very automatic, and it's very habitual, deeply habituated, it is possible through meditation to overcome it. And maybe in your own practice, you've begun to see that, or when you're really making effort looking at the disadvantages of self-centeredness, maybe you've been able to see that for a short period of time, you're aware of that and able to really rein in all that self-referencing, self-focusing, and really think about others, putting others first. So we have our own direct experience when we practice about how it is possible. And if we just keep familiarizing with that, one day we will be able to completely overcome self-centeredness altogether. That's what the Bodhisattvas and the Buddhas have done. Okay, next slide. So what is equanimity? We're trying to cultivate this state of mind, so it's important that we really know what it is. And so the Lamrim Chimo describes it this way. I don't think it's a hard and fast definition, but it's a description. Being even-minded yourself after you have become free of attachment or hostility towards living beings. And so with the Mahayana presentation, we're using analysis to understand why these categories, there's no point in creating these categories, friend, enemy, and stranger, and then discriminating based on these, short-term labelings that we do. And then from the Pali view, from Buddhaghosa's text, what's the name of it? Suddhimagga, meaning, path of purification. So he describes it this way. He says, equanimity as characterized by promoting the aspect of balance towards beings. Its function is to see equality in beings it manifests as the subduing of anger and attachment. And what I remember from Venerable Kadro's teaching is that in the Pali tradition, there's more emphasis on karma, drawing on the understanding of cause and effect, and how attachment and anger cause difficulties for us. Okay, next slide. So here we're starting on page 200 in our text. And if I'm talking too fast, it's because I've had too much caffeine this morning, being a precept morning and having chai for breakfast and juice for to keep a little glucose running in the body. All right, so achieving an equanimous mind towards sentient beings. And as I've read this section, it looks to me that there are 4 main points that stand out. And it's been very worthwhile to go back to that section and read it very slowly and really try to ferret out what are the main points here that he's identifying. So initially, he advises us to develop equanimity towards neutral people, a neutral person, then friends and relatives, then enemies, then all sentient beings. How? Through eliminating attachment and anger. So we've already, in the middle scope of the Lamrim, we've already looked at the afflictions and the faults of the afflictions. Chances are good we still have some attachment and anger. So here we have another opportunity to reflect on that and to put that knowledge into practice. And I've wondered myself if maybe it seems like he's saying you should just be able to sit down and think about a neutral person and develop this even-mindedness. That's kind of how it sounds when you read it. And I wonder if he's talking about sharp faculty practitioners, that, if this text is truly written for those people, then someone who's already developed a conceptual realization of emptiness, their anger and their attachment is going to be much more subdued than mine or maybe yours. So perhaps a person like that could sit down and just call to mind a neutral person and be able to develop this equanimousness of mind, equanimity, by seeing the ridiculousness of attachment and anger, really seeing how they distort the way we look at someone, the way we think about someone, the way we observe them. Both attachment and anger have some distortion, don't they? Some exaggeration based on inappropriate attention. And then there's this clinging. It comes from attachment and aversion, or wishing to harm, actually, that comes from anger. So it's helpful to keep in mind whichever one of these points we go through, that equanimity does not imply that all sentient beings are equal. We can't make sentient beings equal. Sentient beings are very unique, but that's not the point of this meditation. Rather, in the 4 immeasurables, in the preparatory practices, we're usually wishing for others to be free of anger and attachment and indifference. But here in the Mahayana practice of immeasurable equanimity, we're training our own mind to overcome the tendency to have anger and attachment towards people we like, people we don't like. And actually trying to see it as pointless to act under the sway of attachment and hatred towards friends and enemies. And as I mentioned, we do this through analytic meditation. So that's what meditating on equanimity is all about. And this is because our reasons for attraction and aversion are not founded in reality. That never comes up in the mind, or rarely comes up in the mind when we're running with attachment and anger. And I really appreciated in this winter retreat when we've been looking at these 8 verses of thought transformation. And in Venerable's book, Cultivating Compassion, when she describes the 3rd verse, in all actions I will examine my mind, and the moment a disturbing attitude arises endangering myself and others, I will firmly confront and avert it. It was like shocking to me. It's so nice in retreat when your mind is fresh and, things will really land in a different way. And that's where she described how anger usually arises in our mind, and we say, anger, welcome, come in. You're going to prevent others from taking advantage of me, instead of really recognizing what anger does to our mind, the disadvantages of anger when it's running in our mind, that it really disturbs our peace of mind first and foremost. And then we're not thinking clearly. It ruins our happiness. But somehow we're convinced that it's going to bring us what we want. And her advice at that point is apply an antidote. What a concept, like apply an antidote. So somehow just thinking about that in retreat was so helpful for my mind. And so it's a step-by-step process. First of all, we have to recognize when anger is running in our mind, even if it's just that slight aversion in the background, like, I can't stand it when that person does that, or, recognize it at that point, catch it at that point before it gets any traction in our mind, and have the antidotes right on hand. Think about the advantages of patience, or try to apply loving kindness, or we can even apply what we're learning here about equanimity. This person wants to be happy. They think what they're doing is going to bring them happiness. This person has been my mother. I need to be kind to them. I need to be tolerant of them. Whatever it is that's going to help us avert that mind, or even I'm just going to get out of here right now because otherwise I'm going to get angry. Whatever's going to work for you. And the same thing with attachment. Instead of really welcoming attachment and saying, oh, attachment, my friend, you're going to make me happy, you're going to give me whatever you're promising, to really see that attachment is a setup for disappointment. That there are going to be all sorts of unrealistic expectations about the object, the person, whatever it is we have attachment for. And in the long run, it's not going to work out. It's not going to bring us the happiness it's promising. So what is the antidote that works for us? And I think it was Venerable Kadro who asked us, does thinking about impermanence really work as an antidote for you? Are we that familiar with impermanence that it really works as an antidote? Maybe thinking more about the suffering nature, or the dukkha nature of an object. Yeah, maybe its fleetingness can work in certain situations, but it's worth thinking about what are the antidotes I need right on hand that are going to help me as soon as I notice I've got attachment running in the background. Again, the first step is going to be recognizing it, because what I've seen in working with Lama Zopa Rinpoche's book, How to Practice the Dharma during this retreat, attachment is pretty much running in the background all the time. What's going to bring me the most happiness? Is it going to be another sip of this delicious apple juice, or I think it's equally, we think of anger as being more dangerous because it does damage our roots of virtue. But I think attachment is equal, on par with anger in terms of being destructive, because it's so sneaky and it's in the background all the time. So what we don't find in this text that we find in the Lamrim Chimo is that right after this section where Lama Tsongkhapa is talking about taking a neutral person to mind, cultivating an equal-mindedness towards them that is able to quell the attachment and aversion, and then going on, once you have some even-mindedness, going on to the next category, a friend, doing the same with them, then a stranger, and then a difficult person, an enemy. The Lamrim Chenmo says, well then, it asks a question, well then, what meditation eliminates attachment and hostility towards these three persons? And so then Tsongkhapa says, Kamalashila's stages of meditations offer these two approaches that we're going to talk about now. But just before we leave that first point, really understanding the disadvantages of anger and attachment, continuously familiarize with them, that is going to be one of the tools that we necessarily need to develop equanimity. If we just let attachment and anger continue running, there's no way to develop equanimity. So that's one very good antidote. And everyone in this room, I think, we filled up whiteboards of all the disadvantages, and you've even taken pictures of them. So pull them out and review them. Keep them fresh in the mind. All right, so the second point here from Kamala Shila's stages of meditations, and maybe this brings back memories of Geshe Geshe Tabke teaching on this not that long ago. And this is probably, the second point is probably the easiest meditation if we're really new to cultivating equanimity. Tsongkhapa says, since all sentient beings are the same in wanting happiness and not wanting suffering, it is unreasonable for us to benefit some whom we consider close and harm or fail to benefit others whom we consider distant. So all beings, whether they are our friends or our enemies, do want happiness and don't want suffering. This is probably one of the most innate desires of all living beings. It's there at every juncture of our existence, within cyclic existence. And to recognize that is really helpful, that this is the strongest driving force within us, so that we can begin to work with that. And we say this often around here, all sentient beings want to be happy, want to be free of suffering. It's quite common, but do we have much understanding of it? Do we remain constantly aware of it? That's the key. Are we mindful of it? And so we have a lot of things to be mindful of, but this is one that's going to be really helpful to stay mindful of throughout the day. You know, it's easy to say it, just as I want happiness and don't want suffering. The fact is, the same is true for you, and the same is true for you and you. It's true for all of us, that if we all have that driving our minds in the background, there may be some competition about who's going to get their happiness met. Usually we just want others to support our happiness, right? Without giving much thought to their wishes. So again, because we do focus on this a lot here at the Abbey, I suspect we all have had moments where we've had some deeper understanding of this phrase, and we've really gotten it, that yeah, just like I want happiness, the same, it really is true for every living being. And so imagine it's just extending that to a very, very deep awareness so that it's with us all the time. That would change our perspective when we're out driving on the highway or going to the grocery store or the post office and seeing sentient beings. That would change our perspective and how we think about them, how we interpret them. Yes.
This winter I was inspired by thinking that because of we all want happiness and to not suffer, really underlying that is, our underlying motivation is love and compassion. Like if we want happiness and we don't want to suffer, that's love and compassion. And so I was just really inspired, like all of our actions are driven by love and compassion in a very confused, obscured way sometimes, but that deepest, like you said, innate wish to be happy and to be free of suffering is love and compassion. So I was just inspired by that link.
Yeah, and usually that would be love and compassion focused on ourselves, right? So we're really trying to focus that outwards, expand that to include all living beings. Yeah, nice, thank you. Many of you are familiar with this book by Jeffrey Hopkins, Cultivating Compassion. It's been published under a new name, which I don't know. But I appreciated reading the section about equanimity in there because he made it come alive for me in a new way. He said that when we look at people, we can't really tell what they're feeling. We can feel our own desire to have happiness and to be free of suffering. But just looking at another person, we don't have that same resonance, that same connection, that they also have that strong feeling, that strong wish for happiness. So his advice is to start with, actually he starts with someone familiar, because if you check, we do want people we do have more awareness of people we love wanting happiness, and we want for them to have happiness. So he says start with a friend, and he suggests that we connect with that feeling tone, that just as I want happiness, and he says stop there and reflect, feel it. Just as I want happiness, really feel that. And don't want suffering, stop and feel that. The same is true of my dear friend, Robin. My dear friend Robin wants happiness. Stop and feel into that, how that's true for your friend. And doesn't want suffering. And feel that. And he says, take your time with this until that impacts the mind, it impacts the heart, so that we have some strong connection with that. So doing that with people we love, I mean, again, we've all had this experience with people we love. We just want them so badly to have happiness, especially when they don't have happiness, and want them to be free of suffering. So we can draw on that and make use of that. In my own experience, a couple of winters ago, I was meditating each session on equanimity, really trying to get some feeling for this. And to get over this superficiality of just seeing sentient beings and not really keeping them as two-dimensional, I would think about when I'd call a stranger to mind, like the UPS driver that was coming up here regularly. I remember thinking about him a lot. And I would try to imagine what his life was like. Like, you know, he looked like maybe he was a 30-year-old. So I'd think about how he was, what he was likely to be doing in his life as a 30-year-old, you know, working on his career, his relationships, what he was starting a family maybe. And I was thinking about him as a 20-year-old, you know, maybe going to college or doing things that 20-year-olds do. And then thinking about him as a high school student and even as a young child in a family, what his family life might have been, what it was like to be a child, what it was like to be in his mother's womb. And then this comes to the next section, but then imagining, you know, even previous lives and trying to imagine those previous lives of him being in a different relationship with me and being a friend or being an enemy. So there are we can be creative with this. There are lots of different ways. So find the way that works for you to really make this come alive so that we're not just rotely saying, just as I want happiness, all beings want happiness, just as I want to be free of suffering, you want to be free of suffering. Make it come alive for you in whatever way makes sense to you in the moment. And it will change as we go through our study and practice of this. I've seen my own evolution over 20 or 30 years, you know, and I just slowly, hearing teachings again, trying to practice it more sincerely, putting it into my life. So the same will be true for all of us. So that's actually, Kamalashila talks, that's from others' point of view. We're first looking at equanimity, developing equanimity from others' point of view. And like I said, this is probably the easiest, most accessible way of familiarizing or cultivating equanimity. And then the third point up here is from our own point of view. And Tsongkhapa says, there's not a single sentient being who in beginningless cyclic existence has not been my companion hundreds of times. So who should I have attachment for, and who should I have hatred for? So that's another point of analysis for us to investigate. And if we realize that there hasn't been any starting point to the continuous cycle of our births, this will be easy. But that's saying a lot, isn't it? So we have some remedial action or some remedial homework to do to understand ourselves as a continuum. Probably when we look in the mirror in the morning, we don't say, oh, there's a nice looking mental and physical continuum. We don't think of ourselves in that way. But again, going back to the middle scope of the Lamrim, where we're looking at freedom, you know, the freedom from suffering and afflictions. What is it that wants to be free? We talk about the person as being that which is merely imputed, independence upon 4 or 5 aggregates. So that takes a lot of thought. I remember, Venerable Jigme, you did a BBC on really investigating all the different aggregates, each of the different aggregates when we were looking at the 4 establishments of mindfulness. So that can be another very supplementary and necessary meditation for understanding how do I exist as a continuum, as a series of experiences that we label lives, that just continues. The gross body and the gross mind are just temporary. They're here for one life, but there's a continuity of consciousness that's going from life to life. And that's what we really need to identify with. And that's what we're protecting. When we're cultivating virtue, we're preparing our continuity of mind to have good experiences in the future. So let's just assume we have some understanding of that continuity for the sake of looking at this briefly right now. And it's helpful to think. I remember this was like so startling for me to realize that if we start with the people we have attachment for in this life, like think of our parents or our siblings, our partner, and to think about that person, if you really have some awareness of beginningless lives, in the majority of those lives, that person has been a stranger. Wow, to really think about that deeply. That can lessen the attachment that we have for the relationship and the clinging that we have in this one life. Yes, they've also been very kind to us, just like they are in this life. They've also been our worst enemy. That's hard to really call to mind when we have such love and compassion for someone, because we focus so strongly on this one life alone. So that can be very helpful for overcoming attachment. Same thing with someone we have strong aversion for, that in the majority of our beginningless lifetimes, they have been a complete stranger. We've had no connection with them, probably not even been born in the same galaxy with them in most of our lives. So why be so caught up in anger from a few superficial, uncomfortable interactions with them from this one life alone? Or maybe we brought some of that in with us from previous lives. And then thinking about the fact that, if we really think about these beginningless lives and imagine seeing them, imagine you have clairvoyance and you can see that this person who we don't like in this life, we have trouble with in this life, they have been extremely kind to us in the past, as well as harmful. And then thinking about strangers. Yes, they're a stranger in this life, they haven't harmed us, they haven't helped us, and in most lifetimes, they've been a stranger too. But we've also had these strong connections with them as a very, very dear person to us. Our mother, our father, our sister, our brother, our friend, our pet, our child, whatever it is. And we've also had other lifetimes where they've been our worst enemy. They've chopped us up and killed us and flayed us alive on fire and all sorts of things. So really thinking about this over and over can bring some equanimity, some even-mindedness to the mind, if we do it again and again. And there are, for those of you who are influenced by scriptural citations, and there's that story of Shariputra when he was able to observe, it goes, he eats the flesh of his father and beats his mother while she sports with the sworn enemy upon her lap. There are several stories like that. People describing their clairvoyance and being able to see the crazy relationships, how they're constantly changing. I remember Jeffrey Hopkins describing our relationships with all sentient beings being like a pot of boiling vegetable soup. In one life, the pea and the carrot go together. In the next life, the tomato and the artichoke go together. And, it just keeps boiling and changing and shifting. And I think that's a good analogy. So that's the third of the 4 points in this section. And then the fourth one is underscoring the fault of uncertainty. And we've seen this before. Again, it's found in the middle scope of the Lamrim. It's one of the 6 uncertainties, or one of the 6 sufferings of cyclic existence. And so besides the fluctuations of friend, enemy, and stranger in this life, and we've seen how those titles, those categories fluctuate, if we apply that to the larger perspective of all lives, and really think about how this boiling pot of vegetable soup happens, that can help us not to be quite so attached, so affixed to those categories. So and this can be in a meditation all of its own, just thinking about who did I consider a friend 5 years ago? Where are they now in relationship to these categories, friend, enemy, stranger? Or 10 years ago, 20 years ago, for some of us 30, 40, 50 years ago? Where are these people now? That can be a very powerful way to wake up to the fact that these categories are superficial, temporary, fleeting, adventitious, really. They depend on the circumstances. You know, often you have friends. You remember when you worked and you had office friends? They were, and then you left that job and you didn't talk to those people anymore because they were just your office friends because of the circumstance. So, again, going back to really understanding the fault of uncertainty as a type of suffering, that can be very helpful. And I'll just add in this, with this contemplation, that Venerable also makes this very strong point, Venerable Chodron makes this strong point that when we meditate on cultivating equanimity, one of the first things we recognize is that these categories have to do with me, with how beings relate to me, how I see sentient beings relating to me. So that also points out, you know, the flimsiness of the reasons, the rationale that we use to apply these categories. So these are 4 very good contemplations that we can spend quite a bit of time reflecting on. When I was first studying Lamrim Chenmo at Chenrezig Institute, my teacher at that time, Geshe Tashi Tsering, advised us to meditate on equanimity every day for a year, for a half hour. And our eyes got very wide, like, who's got a half an hour every day to meditate on this? And I wasn't able to do it for a year, but I did it for about a half a year. And think about it. Think about the benefit of that. Overcoming attachment and aversion, our real enemies. There's going to be a lot of benefit to that. And then also, as I mentioned, doing this in every session in the winter retreat a couple years ago really had some impact on my mind. I was happy to do that. So I encourage you to take this meditation in particular very seriously. Take it to heart. Pavanka Rinpoche says you must work hard at equanimity for months or years on end. Otherwise, your foundation for your enlightenment is only wishful thinking. It's a necessary foundation. It's not a luxury, it's a necessary foundation. And remember, Venerable Kadro said that she had heard somewhere that he spent a full year in meditation just focusing on trying to accomplish this meditation. And then as Geshe Sopa says, even if it takes our whole life to master just the first step, we will have begun an essential practice. So I'd like to lead you in a short meditation on equanimity that kind of brings together a lot of these points. And so, yes, we've done this meditation before, but try to experience it as fresh, as new, because every moment it is a new experience for us. So just take a comfortable sitting posture. And just focus on your breath. Begin by calling to mind a neutral person, a stranger, but someone specific who you've seen recently, but you don't really know. Could be a neighbor or someone at the post office, UPS driver. Think of someone specific. And notice the feelings that arise as you call this person to mind. And then ask yourself, why do I feel this way about this person I label a stranger? What are your reasons based on? When did this person become a stranger for you? Would everyone see this person as a stranger? Or is this label subjective and changeable? Doesn't this person want happiness and want to be free of suffering, just like me and everyone else? In that regard, aren't we all the same? And given beginningless cyclic existence, isn't it possible that this person has been my father, mother, sister, brother, dear friend many times in previous lives, and also my worst enemy? Don't I depend upon this person to develop good qualities like loving kindness, compassion, bodhicitta? So is it appropriate to hold others close and dear and help them, but not this person? Is it appropriate to continue being indifferent? What would it take to remove the indifference I feel towards this person? So imagine for a moment having an even-minded equanimity towards this person without any attachment or hostility, without any indifference, and imagine how that might feel. And then call to mind a friend or someone you're fond of, someone very dear to you, and try to think of someone specific. And notice the feelings just by calling them to mind. And ask yourself, why do I feel affection towards this person? Why do I find them appealing? And just check if those reasons are valid, or are they just based on this one short life? When did this person become a friend to you? And would everyone see them as a friend? And then just check, do I have attachment for this person? Do I exaggerate their good qualities above and beyond what's there? Do I have unrealistic expectations of them to make me happy? Am I clinging to them or their friendship in some distorted way? Could I still love them and want them to be happy without attachment? And from their side, doesn't this person want happiness and want to be free of suffering just like me and everyone else? And given past lives, hasn't this very dear person been a stranger in most of those past lives? And also my worst enemy at times too? Just because we can't remember past relationships doesn't negate their reality. So is it really appropriate to hold this person unequivocally closer than others and to help them more than others? So imagine having an even-minded equanimity towards this person without any attachment, without any exaggeration or clinging. And then call to mind an enemy or a difficult person, someone you feel uncomfortable around, someone who pushes your buttons. See them very clearly and just notice the feelings that arise, calling them to mind. And then ask, why do I feel aversion or anger towards this person? When did this person become an enemy for me? At what point? Given the Buddhist perspective, are my reasons valid for hating this person? Would everyone see this person as an enemy like I do? Or is this label subjective and even changeable? Doesn't this person want happiness and want to avoid suffering just like me and every other living being? And given past lives, isn't it likely that this person has played the role of my mother, father, sister, brother, dear friend, and been a stranger countless times? Don't I depend on this person to develop good qualities like patience, loving kindness, compassion? So what would it take to remove the aversion I feel towards this person? Imagine having an even-minded equanimity towards this person without any hostility, without exaggerating their negative qualities and wishing them harm. How would that feel? So having examined our own experiences in this way, see if there's any conclusion that you'd like to draw about seeing others as friends, enemies, and strangers. So I know that all of you have done that meditation before. Did you discover anything new this time? Yeah.
When I was looking for a person that I dislike, mostly a few people came by, but it's not that I don't like them, but I feel uncomfortable in their presence. And that shows for instance, somebody is very confident and that triggers me because it makes me feel awkward and very inadequate. But that doesn't mean that I hate them or have aversion to them. It's just, so I was struggling with that. Well, I don't feel aversion, I don't feel hatred, but I do feel uncomfortable in their presence. So I wasn't sure how to deal with that during the meditation. Maybe you have some advice on that?
I think if you check, you will have some kind of feeling repelled about that person. So you can use even that. It doesn't have to be strong hate. Yeah. Yeah, sometimes it is hard to find an enemy. That's a very strong word, isn't it? But there are people who push our buttons, especially living in community, right? So just use whatever comes up. Even that discomfort is enough to try to see how you're labeling that person, giving that discomfort. Have you put them in a category of enemy or someone that you don't see them like? The description that comes to my mind is the Buddha sitting with one person chopping on one arm and another person massaging the other side of his body, and he has equanimity towards both of those people. So like that. I mean, that's the standard.
Yeah, I realize I just want to make more categories and make it more complex than it already is.
Uh-huh. Anything else? Yeah.
It's humbling, maybe embarrassing, to come back to the person with whom you have aversion, not big hate, not anything, but to see how my mind is reluctant to own that it is my mind. Mm-hmm. What would you like? What would make that different? Was the question you asked. Like, well, they'll change. Right there. I want them to do something different. Uh-huh. So yeah, I mean, I think actually this idea of doing it half an hour every day is kind of brilliant. Who knows where the time for that is. But, because yeah, you can do this a zillion times, but ask the question, why do they have this, or why do you have this feeling about this person? Well, it's something about them. Mm-hmm. And that is it's just humbling, as I said, embarrassing even, but that's the response.
I suspect you're in good company, but
I'm sure I am. That's why I wanted to bring it up. But
we should all be humble.
But I also wanted to reveal it, because if I say that out loud, then I don't let it sink into the ocean of my mind.
Yeah, and I have found it difficult to keep identifying the same person as the enemy again and again and again every time I do the meditation. That becomes uncomfortable. And then it's time to work on things from my side. That can be an inspiration. Yeah. Uh-huh.
What was interesting for me this time was to work on like people with the same attributes, but in all three categories. So for example, I find, sorry, no offense to anyone, but like middle-aged white men are often the perpetrator in my mind for all kinds of reasons. So, working with that. But it's like, think of a stranger who's a middle-aged white man. Think of a good friend who is a middle-aged white man, And I was like, oh, right. It's just a good reminder. But that enemy image is very strong from very many, many years that I've worked a lot with, especially this retreat.
Okay. So now we have 13 minutes to look at seeing all beings as having been our mothers. Oh, wait, let's come back. The next slide is just a short conclusion that Venerable Kadro led us through about working with this, and I thought it was very helpful. So there are various meditations or contemplations we can do to cultivate equanimity, like contemplating the role our mind plays, as you were mentioning, Venerable Chinny, in how we view others, labeling friends, enemies, and strangers. That's based on temporary causes and conditions and how we interpret things that happen to us, so that's helpful. Also, meditating more on the disadvantages of anger and attachment, contemplating how we're all the same, wanting happiness, not wanting suffering. We all have Buddha nature. And then meditating on impermanence, the impermanence of the relationships and how they change. They're very temporary. And reducing self-centered orientation, that will be helpful as well. So that's the next slide. That's just a nice summary. Okay, so let's just, actually, Lama Tsongkhapa only has 2 paragraphs on seeing all beings having been our mothers, maybe assuming that from a Buddhist orientation, most people would already understand that. But as Westerners, we don't have that conditioning. So we need to do some remedial action. So this is under the heading establishing that all beings have a likable aspect, or seeing all beings as appealing. And so that's meditating on them as one's mother, their kindness, wishing to repay their kindness. So on page 201, he says, in the sutras, it is taught that since cyclic existence is beginningless, our births are also beginningless. That's a nice pervasion there. Therefore, we have been born and we have died incessantly, so that there is no body in cyclic existence that we have not taken, no place where we have not been born, and also no one who has not been a relative, such as a mother. Moreover, not only have they been our mother in the past, they will also be so in the future. Therefore, reflecting in that way, try to gain firm certainty that they have been your mother. For once that certainty arises, it will be easy to remember their kindness and so forth. On the other hand, if it doesn't arise, you will have no basis for remembering their kindness and so forth. And so the mother is considered the ultimate friend, isn't she? And of course, there's the caveat that some people have had difficult relationships with their mothers in this life, and that's the basis we're using. So if that's the case for you, then try to call to mind someone else, maybe a grandparent or a father or someone who was nurturing in your life. But in general, even if mothers have their own personal quirks, which they all do, they have carried us to term, they've given birth to us. If that's all they did for us, that would be a lot and something to really appreciate. But in addition to that, they fed us and clothed us and cleaned us and took care of us and taught us many things, even created negativity on our behalf. So we'll come to that eventually. So if we want to develop bodhicitta, then we need to prove that all sentient beings have been our mother. And this is considered one of the most difficult Lamrim topics to understand, right along with seeing that your guru has been a Buddha. So these are the 2 that are most difficult. Oh, wait. So to understand this topic, then we need to understand our mind as a continuum, as having no beginning. And so if you put up the next slide, here are 4 suggestions that I have found helpful in my practice for contemplating this topic to familiarize with. So the first one, some people will easily find scriptural citations helpful in developing confidence about this. And so Venerable Kadro gave us the one that Bhikkhu Bodhi had given to her. It's on the next slide, where it says, Bhikkhus, this samsara is without discoverable beginning. A first point is not discerned of beings roaming and wandering on, hindered by ignorance and fettered by craving. It's not easy, bhikkhus, to find a being who in this long course has not previously been your mother, your father, your brother, your sister, your son, your daughter. That's in the Mother Sutra. Also, there's a beautiful quote by the Buddha on the night of his awakening, where he talks about being able to see all of his past lives. I couldn't find the quote, so if anybody knows where that is, please remind me. Also, if you go on Sutta Central, which has mostly Chinese and Pali sutras, and you search for past lives, there are a lot of sutras in there that talk about where the Buddha is teaching about past lives. So for some people, this is enough to give them a lot of faith and confidence that yes, indeed, I must have had a beginningless lifetime is not a problem. I can easily accept that, take that on board. But for others, that's not going to be enough. So then we have to use other means. One of them is many anecdotal stories of people who remember their past lives. I searched on Amazon just the word reincarnation, and 40,000 books, it said, were linked to that word. So there's a lot that's been written on that topic. So we have to avail ourselves of that. Not only holy beings, you know, there are a lot of stories, or some stories, of holy beings who seem to have some memory of their past lives, like His Holiness Lama Zopa Rinpoche, Lama Yeshe, but also lots of ordinary beings. I was just looking very briefly on YouTube, and there are some new videos there. There's one of a little boy who remembers falling to his death at 9/11. And his mother says that when he was born, he was like an old man, you know, like he was just had such a seriousness about him, and was afraid whenever they'd go by tall buildings, and was afraid whenever airplanes would fly over, until she started putting these pieces together. So that's a current experience, and I think he's American. Yeah, I think he lives in America now. There was also a story of a little boy, cute little boy, who remembered being a black woman named Pam who died in a fire. And so when he started talking about his past life as Pam, well, first of all, whenever he would draw something and his mother would say, "Who's that little bunny?" He'd say, "That's Pam." And then, "Who's that butterfly?" "Well, that's Pam." And she wondered, where's he getting this name, Pam? And so finally she asked him, "Well, who's Pam?" And he said, "Well, that's me." And so she started researching. He started talking about a fire. He's very afraid of fire. Started talking about this past life as Pam, and fire engulfing him. And she did some research on the internet and thought she found a story that linked. And so, but it was of a black woman. So she went in and asked him, "When you were Pam, what color was your skin?" And he said, "Black," you know, without any hesitation. Freaked out the father, but anyway, there are a lot of stories like this, and these are anecdotal, but also there are people who have tried to apply scientific rigor to this kind of investigation, like Dr. Ian Stevenson's in the many books and articles that he's written, and he's a person with a lot of street cred. He was a professor of psychiatry for 50 years. He was the head of the department at the University of Virginia Medical School for 10 years. You know, he's not like some flake, but he had a very strong interest in this, and so he tried to apply very strong scientific rigor to over 3,000 cases of children in particular who remember their past lives. And Venerable Kadra also mentioned a book by Carol Bowman that we have in our library called Children's Past Lives: How Past Life Memories Affect Your Child. So we can use that as a supportive evidence. You know, it's not maybe our own direct experience, our own direct valid cognition of past lives, but it can certainly be supported. We can use that for developing an inference, I think. And then another method for thinking about this is that recollection of past lives can be cultivated through developing concentration. It's one of the super knowledges. So once a person has developed calm abiding, there are other steps that need to be cultivated. I'm not sure what they are, but this is one of the super knowledges that people develop specifically to help sentient beings. Imagine, right now we just guess what people need and how we can help them. But imagine having clairvoyance of their past lives and also of how they think. We'd have a much greater chance of being really beneficial to them. And then finally, I think the one that we can have the strongest experience of ourselves is really getting to know, becoming familiar with the continuity of our own mind. And so if I had more time, we would go through a short regression, as it were, of thinking about how the mind of today is a product of the mind that we had yesterday, and all the things that we're thinking and all the conversations we had, all the experiences that we ingested. We can see that for ourselves. We can make that link. It's not too far. We can also imagine how what we're doing with our mind now or today is going to impact who we are tonight, how we're thinking tonight or tomorrow. And so if we take time to really go through that regression and really making the case that this mind is a continuity, a mental continuum, And then we imagine, even at the time of our physical birth into this life, and even thinking back through the moments of the womb, there are some studies that have shown that the experiences that affect children in the womb can even express themselves at the level of the genes. So there is mind there, there's mind registering experience. Just imagine tracing that all the way back to the first moment of mind, and then reflecting how mind is impermanent. It must have a cause, and not just some random cause. It has to be a compatible cause. And so mind being, from a Buddhist point of view, being non-material, clarity and awareness, it can't come from the body. They are disparate causes. So we've heard that. We need to familiarize with that and really develop some conviction in this this reality, so that when we do look in the mirror or when we do think of ourselves, a continuum comes to mind. We actually think, oh yeah, it's a mental continuum. We like to think of ourselves as a noun, but we're actually a verb. We're a process. We're a flow, a mental and physical flow. And that takes a lot of familiarity to cut through all the grasping at permanence and grasping at inherence that we've done. Okay, so then as we do that, then it makes sense that not only have we had a mother in this one life, but if we were to trace back through the moments of the previous life where that initial moment of mind came from, we could trace all the way back, and we would say that if that was a womb birth, there would be a mother in that life. So we haven't had a mother in all of our lives. There are some rebirths where a mother isn't required, but in all womb births, we require a mother. So just as our previous lives are infinite, our mothers are also, or the number of times we've had mothers is infinite. And there's a question about whether sentient beings are actually finite or infinite. I don't know the answer to that. For meditation's sake, you can imagine that they're finite, so that let's say you go back 100 years and there are 100 sentient beings, you could say potentially they've all been your mother once. But if you go back to 101 rebirths, then someone has to double up and play your mother twice. So in this way, we can start thinking about how people have not just been our mother once, but they've played the role of our mother many, many times, countless times, really. When you think about infinity, it's a very long time. And then start applying that to every sentient being. Our mother has been our mother many, many times in many different situations. That can really open up our understanding of the role she's playing in our life. Our father, too, has been our mother. And again, applying this to specific people. The person to my right, sitting to my right, has been my mother. You know, the person to my left has been my mother. And Pabanka Rinpoche says, the criterion that determines whether or not you have developed this understanding after repeated training is if you see a sentient being, even an ant, you will involuntarily remember that you were once that being's child and completely dependent on it for all your needs, meaning that we'll have an awareness, mindfulness, that this person has been our mother. So I'll leave it to you to do that meditation. And this is the starting point for developing the sevenfold instruction of cause and effect. So any final comments, or maybe one question? Yeah.
I had a really striking experience about 15 years ago, maybe. And this was, long before I met Buddhism. I was at a conference, kind of running a recruitment booth with another person. And people would come up and he would, shake their hand and greet them. And I kept thinking these were old friends. And then he would say, "What's your name?" And I realized, just the amount of warmth and friendliness that he could have for these people. He wasn't at all a Buddhist, but that was just something that really struck me and inspired me. And I think some of that was just seeing that commonality, how we talk about it being, okay, we all want happiness and we all want suffering. It was so striking to me to see that can be a quality that we can have, that when we're surrounded by people who judge and criticize and categorize, it's hard to imagine developing true equanimity. But seeing someone who's closer to it than I am by far, really helped.
You said that person wasn't a Buddhist?
Nope, he wasn't a Buddhist, but just had this capacity that, at least within that context, could see all of these people coming up as friends.
Yeah. Very quickly, I had an experience of that. Maybe I've mentioned it to some of you. And I think it was 2004. Can't remember. I hadn't been to Kopan Monastery. I felt like I was the last FPMT nun, never to have been there. And so I got an invitation to Lama Kunchog's enthronement. Geshe Lama Kunchog's enthronement. I thought, here's my chance. I'm going to Kopan. And so when I arrived at the airport, Geshe Tenzin Tsepal was there and greeted me like I was some long-lost relative. And I kept thinking, why are you treating me this way? You don't even know me. And then I had the chance to meet him again a couple years after that. He came into, this was in Singapore, Lama Zopa Rinpoche was teaching, and he came into a room, the Sangha was having lunch in a particular room. He walked in and he made eye contact with everyone. And then he went off to talk to some people. He came up to me the next day and said, "Oh, Tenzin Tsepal, I'm sorry I didn't have a chance to greet you yesterday." And again, I was like, you don't know me from Adam. Why are you treating me this way? But this is someone, I think, who has developed this kind of equanimity and understanding of all beings having been very dear to us in our past lives. Yeah. Okay, so we'll finish there. We'll do some dedicating. So I really encourage people, especially people online, to take this to heart. Really give this meditation a chance. Pick a particular period of time that you're going to do the meditation every day. It's so helpful to do it every day and see how it changes over time. So whether it's a few days or a week, a month, a year, whatever works for you, I really encourage you to try that on.
Due to this merit, may we soon attain the awakened state of Guru Buddha, that we may be able to liberate all sentient beings from their sufferings. May the precious Bodhi mind, not yet born, arise and grow. May the born have no decline, but increase forevermore.
I just want to do one more commercial. This is also an excellent book, Bodhicitta, Cultivating the Compassionate Mind of Enlightenment by Venerable Losang Gyatso. This was Geshe Rado's teacher at IBD. Beautiful book. It's written from a Drepung Losling point of view. So there are some things that are a little different from a Gelugpa point of view, but it's a beautiful book. I highly recommend it. What's that? Oh, okay. I should have said Sarah J.